Councillor Sadal Marwa, WPTU, Chairman of the Race Relations and Equal Opportunities Committee, Birmingham City Council.
वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा वाहिगुरु जी की फतेह सिख चैनल के प्यारे दर्शकों सिख चैनल वालों आप जी का बहुत बहुत स्वागत है। अज नवा शो शुरू करने जा रहे हैं सिक्स एंड पॉलिटिक्स। यह पहला शो है आपके सामने पेश किया जा रहा है जिस दे विच जो भी इत्थे दी समस्यावां हो गई उन्होंने डिस्कस करांगे अंग्रेजी दे विच ते पंजाबी दे विच। So welcome to the Sikh channel. It's the first show of Sikhs and Politics. I'm joined by Right Honourable John Spellar, MP for Worley, who's been a Minister for Armed Forces, Minister for Transport, Northern Ireland, and Deputy Chief Whip. And he's been in Parliament for quite a long time. And he is a very, very experienced man. John, welcome to Sikh channel and Sikhs and Politics. Sat Sri Akal.
Sat Sri Akal.
John, we've sent letters out to start this show because of the elections coming up and so forth, and trying to engage people in British politics rather than anywhere else, and what happens to their lives in this country. So this was the whole idea behind this. So thank you very much for coming and giving us the time. And should we just kick off with what's actually happening in NHS? And I was reading the recent report that people are waiting hours at the A&E. What's going on?
Thank you, Sadal, and thank you for inviting me on to the programme. And you've highlighted initially one of the really big issues of 2014. Because I remember back in 1997 when we became the government, and there were long waiting lists and people were complaining to me how long it was taking, not just to get an operation, but even to see a consultant, and all sorts of hold-ups at A&E and so on. And we put large sums of money in at that time and trained a lot more doctors and nurses. And those figures really came down. And what really concerns me is that we're now seeing these go back up again. And we have spent over £1 billion on reorganising the health service. And that's on administration and bureaucracy, and not actually where it really matters, which is on the front line, which so many of your viewers working in the health service will know the sort of squeeze that's been going on. People being made redundant, people being moved around. It's a real problem. Frankly, it's a real scandal.
Well, John, why people, I mean, politics is a game what everybody plays, but why the lives of people? When somebody needs attention at the A&E, and they shouldn't be waiting though, like, is it short of nurses? Is it short of doctors? What is it? Why are the people been waiting in the corridors?
It's a big mixture. In some cases, it's about organisation. Let's be frank about it. Some hospitals are run better than others. But even with those that are run well, when they're having to spend more money and also much more management time and attention on dealing with reorganisation and new structures and creation of a new health market, all of that is diverting people from that really important job, which is actually day in, day out, running their hospitals or running their GP practices. Many of them thought, oh, well, this might give them some more opportunities. But what they're finding out is they train to be doctors, not to be accountants and human resources managers.
Why there's redundancies? I mean, I also read there's 7,000 redundancy in the NHS, and what's going on?
Yes, a number of hospitals were finding that they, in order to save money, they were having to cut back on what is, after all, their biggest expenditure, understandably, which is staff. Now, firstly, that has obviously caused problems in those hospitals. But secondly, shouldn't they actually have been arranging, even if that was going to happen, arranging transfers elsewhere in the health service, rather than, quite frankly, the disgraceful spectacle of hospitals now going abroad and trying to hoover up trained health staff from other countries. That's to the detriment of our people here, but also it's to the detriment of the countries they're coming from. Many of the countries in Africa, many of their trained personnel, they're doing a good job here, but they're actually denuding their own health services. And yet at the same time, the health education people, the bureaucrats there, have been cutting back on training places in the West Midlands for nurses. So not only are we not getting the nurses, we're depriving many of our unemployed youngsters from the opportunity of earning a good living, but also having a worthwhile career and a worthwhile profession.
If we are just suffering for the population already here, now, I mean, there's a big hoo-ha and big headlines, Romanians and Bulgarians coming just after the 1st of January this year. And, I mean, whether those people come here or not, that happened in the 60s. When people like me came and from the European countries, when the Jewish community came. And, I mean, immigration will come and go, and that will have an extra burden on the education, on national health, and all the services, the local council and everything else. Is the country prepared for that already?
Big difference, Sardal. I grew up in the 60s, went to university in the middle 60s. Many of my friends at the local youth club didn't go to university. Very few of us did in those days, but they all went into work. And here we have now, we're told this week, nearly 1 million people, million youngsters, not in education, employment or training. We're also reading how that is affecting them. Many of them feeling their lives are not worthwhile. Many of them saying that they've even at times contemplated suicide. Now, those are individual tragedies, but for a country, it's an appalling waste as well. And the idea that we should be opening up our labour market to get more unskilled coming from Romania and Bulgaria, when we have so many of our own youngsters, we really need to be, getting a proper policy that enables our youngsters from all communities to be able to get on that first rung of getting employed and getting trained in work and understanding work and getting new skills and therefore being employable for the future. We all know the old saying, the best way to get a job is to have a job.
Absolutely.
But these youngsters are not getting onto that ladder, not getting into those networks. That's a huge priority for us.
It's funny you should mention the 60s. I mean, when I was doing my electrical engineering, I could walk into one job and leave the other one on a Friday and go into Monday, and apprenticeships, and there were skills needed and people were training. And people who got the skills, they are retiring. They're not passing on those skills to the youngsters. And why? Why are we not doing the training? Why are we not creating the apprenticeship and passing on the skills to the youngsters, the ones you mentioned, who are suicidal and all sorts of things?
2 or 3 things happened. One was a lot of the big utilities like the gas and the electric and so on got privatized. And previously they used to train more people than they needed, and that went into the system. Companies also saw it as part of their obligation, but also part of their long-term interest. And then in the construction trade, which, as you know, many of the Sikh community came here as skilled workers to work in the construction trade. And Margaret Thatcher casualised that industry, and you had all these people working as self-employed. So nobody actually took responsibility for training. And the numbers, apart from the electricians, who did organise on an industry basis to get people trained, in all the other trades, nobody was being trained, so that when there was an upsurge, they had to recruit people from abroad because they hadn't been doing the training. Now, there are some encouraging signs. Wilmot Dixon here in Birmingham, over at Aston, have got a terrific training establishment. They're doing work with Birmingham Council and Samwell and others, really encouraging. A Jaguar Land Rover, of course, which is we'll maybe come back to that in a minute, but which is a big success story. Tata have shown an enormous lead in that, reviving a lot of the manufacturing in the Midlands and also reviving training. But it's got to be much wider than that, much broader than that, so that all of our youngsters, not just those who go to university, but all of our youngsters have those opportunities, because for many, a craft training, a technical training, will actually be more suitable and actually lead to a very worthwhile and fulfilling career, and also the possibility of setting up your own business.
Because of the youngsters are the future of tomorrow. Without them, nobody will succeed. In political field, in any field.
Nobody's going to look after us and keep us.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, that is our future. That's where we should be investing.
Yeah.
That's where we should be looking up to. Whether they go to university, whether they go to colleges or manual workers, because you need in every stage of work, people, you need executives, you need manual work and all sorts of things. And I always said, we did some work in the back, the Manpower Services Commission or the youth training schemes, and although they benefited, people benefited. And I can't see really where, successive governments are actually going with that. And, why aren't we encouraging people and, that youngsters who are suicidal, who are just louting around, then you get all sorts of disturbances in the streets, and also to take everybody away to get them into work, isn't it?
I think that's hugely important, and I think there's a lot more needs to be done. Now, everybody needs to play their part. Local councils need to be taking people on training, but they also, local councils and government alike, and I did this when I was a government minister, need to be insisting, if you're going to do a job for us, say a construction job, you've got to have a ratio of apprentices on your job to do it. And we've got to change the culture. Away from this short-termism, just looking at the next contract. With the banks, we've got to move them away from just trying to turn a profit overnight on a movement in the currency, and actually get them much more, and they're still dragging their feet, get them much more to be investing in the engineering firms of the Midlands. Engineering in the Midlands is showing a big revival. It's really encouraging. Not just Jaguar Land Rover, JCB announcing a big new investment, but a lot of other firms are exporting more. The Midlands, once again, is becoming an exporting powerhouse for this country. But it's got to go broader, and there's got to be encouragement, and also, frankly, governments, local councils, hospitals and others ought to be using every endeavour to be buying goods made in this country. Scandalous, for example, that the railway system gave a preference to Siemens building their trains in Germany, compared with Bombardier just across in Derby, and where they were very competitive, and quite frankly, the terms of the contract really tilted things in Siemens' favour. They weren't even trying to get the work into a British factory. Now, let me be quite clear: the German railways don't buy from anybody else.
No,
they buy from German manufacturers. So do the French. There's something wrong with our British civil service that they don't look after British industry, but then that means there isn't the continuity, and therefore there isn't the training program, and slowly we run our industry down. We used to have train manufacturing in Smethwick. We used to have it in Birmingham, in Washwood Heath.
Absolutely, yeah.
And slowly those lost market share, and the work went abroad. We've got to stop that rot, because we've got to pay our way in the world, but it's also crucial to providing the sort of jobs that maintains a dynamic, thriving society. The reason why, as you know, so many from the Sikh community came to the Midlands was because of the industrial dynamism here. They've made a big contribution towards it, but we all need to be working together to make sure that that's sustained.
Can I just now go on to the economics? George Osborne is trying to tell us that the economy is picking up. I'm sure it is. They're coming out of recession and all that. What is the real picture? Are we really heading towards becoming that economic power the world power we used to be, or are we just simply playing with figures?
Not entirely. But it's a bit like when the Liberal Democrats this week said that their membership had increased this year. And of course, since 2010, their membership has absolutely plummeted by about a third, but it picked up by about 200 this year. And that's really what's happened with the economy. We went into a quite unnecessary deep recession as a result of deliberate government policies. And it is true that we're starting to come out. There's always the end of a recession, and things are starting to improve. And we've already mentioned Jaguar Land Rover, but that's a big part of this economic revival. All tribute to the Tatars for the investment that they've put into the company. But interestingly enough, that wise old bird Ken Clarke, who's been Chancellor of the Exchequer, a couple of months ago made a very wise speech when he said the problem the government faces is that they can say that the economy is reviving and the figures are correct, it is reviving, but for far too many people around the country, their response will be, it don't feel like that to me. And there's a lot of places where people are still having it very tough. They're still on shorter hours. Said in engineering, a lot of them are recovering those hours and getting back into full-time work and overtime. Quite a number of others are still struggling. Construction supplies is starting to pick up, but it needs a bit of time to actually start after the real big drop that they experienced. Lots of people who work for the public sector are really being squeezed and still being made redundant. Birmingham announcing they may have to lay more people off. Now, I'm not against greater efficiency, but do it sensibly in reasonable time, and not in this emergency slash and burn approach. And also at the same time, people have seen that their earnings are not going up, but at the same time, the cost of living, particularly on things like fares, and fuel prices, food prices, all of these are racing up way ahead of people's earnings. And for the great majority of the people in the country, if you say to them, are you better off than you were 3 years ago? The answer is definitely no. And for your London viewers, I mean, the rapid increase in house prices in the London area is pushing up rents, but also for many of those young couples wanting to get a start on the housing ladder, it's pushing those houses further and further
away. Now,
a few of those may get lucky with a government loan, but quite frankly, unless we increase the supply of housing, that's in the end for everybody else just putting a bit more petrol on the flames.
Energy issue in the last few weeks, again, that came up. The bills on the energy, gas, electric, you name it, is going up. When your leader, Ed Miliband, says he's going to freeze that, right? And there's obviously a lot of talk going on about that, whether his sums work out or whether the Tory sums work out. How realistic is it?
But let's be clear what he really said. What he said was, the energy market isn't working. The margin that the companies are making is far too high, because we've seen when the wholesale energy prices go up, retail prices to the consumer rocket. When the wholesale prices drop back, they don't drop back nearly as much as the drop in the wholesale prices. And so the energy market isn't working. The big six have increases that are very close to each other. And they're not doing using their best endeavours to actually keep prices down. Fortunately, they've now introduced some changes, at the very least, to simplify tariffs so people can get a clearer idea. So what Ed Miliband was saying was, when we come in, we will need to reform the energy market. However, in the meantime, while we're doing that, we'll put a freeze on prices so the companies don't whack up the prices for that to be the baseline from where any changes will come in the future. Now, I don't think that people are going to give the energy companies much time of day, because they know how they, and the water companies as well, how they've been taking them for a ride.
Well, John, European elections in May, right? UKIP banding the wagon that we should come out, I mean, how there's no benefits and so forth. And where, after the May elections, do we take that as a referendum? Because whenever we get the referendum or not, that remains to be seen. After the European election, whichever way it goes, right? What are we really looking for from the Europe after the May elections?
No, I mean, I don't actually think that UKIP's main appeal is really on Europe.
Well, they will say they want to come out, don't they?
No, that's one of their policies, but they're running a number of policies. Some of that is with disillusioned Conservatives. The biggest chunk of votes they're getting are from ex-Conservatives. I'm not denying they get some votes from us as well, by the way. But the biggest chunk of votes they get are from Conservatives who might, in other circumstances, have come across to us, not all of them. But they are pretty discontented with the way that Cameron is running the Conservative Party. They think it's very much a sort of North London discussion group. It isn't really touching the lives of ordinary Conservatives. So there's a lot of discontent in the Tory party. We see that from Conservative MPs, and their voters are expressing that as well. Also, the really big changes that have come about as a result of the global financial crisis, which has been hugely difficult, but even so, there has still been an enormous amount of pain and anxiety that's been felt, and people feel a bit powerless in the face of that. And all governments would have struggled to deal with it. This one, I would argue, has made it worse as a result of the way they've handled it. And I think that, for example, the analysis that Ed Balls did, if anybody goes Balls, Bloomberg, August of 2010, he did a speech there to the Bloomberg organisation, which outlined how this wouldn't work, and it's taken us 3 years. I mean, up until now, we've not had 1 month of growth. Sorry, we've not had 1 month at which earnings have outstripped prices. We've had all of those months, people's standard of living has been slipping back. So therefore, with all of those pressures coming on, people are looking possibly for an easy alternative, and Nigel Farage is trying to provide that. Now, I think a bit as we've seen with the Liberal Democrats, when people have a further look at them, and it's quite interesting that Farage's public opinion ratings have been going down quite a bit. So people seeing more of him, they're liking less of him. But I don't underestimate some of the feelings that there are out there of people who are feeling unhappy with changes in their neighbourhood, in their lives, with their health service, in their jobs, and particularly pensioners feeling that, because they thought they had a social contract. They would work hard all their lives, they would play by the rules, they would pay their taxes, and they would have a reasonably comfortable, not an affluent, but a reasonably comfortable old age. And they feel that being taken away from them.
After the European election, there's another one. Scottish independence, right? And as you know, there's a lot of Sikhs living in Scotland. And if the vote is yes, right, where do we go? You mean, do we have a borderline trying to get into Scotland? And if you have a British passport, is it going to be, if I renew my passport, if I live in Scotland, what's that going to be? And there's all umpteen questions. What's your views on that?
Well, these are all questions that Mr. Salmond is trying to avoid. And to say, well, no, you will stay part of the EU, and the EU say, well, actually, you'll have to apply. And the Spanish, who've got big problems with Catalonia, say, not on your life. And so it might not be all plain sailing. And he says, well, we'll be part of the sterling area, so we'll still keep the pound. And so we would have a country using the pound over which we had no control over borrowing. That doesn't seem to me to work out particularly well. So he does seem to be trying to say, well, look, you can, as my grandmother used to say, you can have your penny and your bun. And the answer is you can't. And I think that what we're seeing from opinion polls, the great majority of people in Scotland are very clear that, in fact, that we are better together.
Absolutely.
And I think that, as you rightly say, there's quite a large number of Sikhs in Scotland who will have relatives in England. Why do they want to be in different countries? What would be the the arguments, particularly in the border areas of England, who already feel that they're being disadvantaged, and would therefore be saying, look, we want some protection in this position. And so a country that has actually been, the United Kingdom has been a hugely successful country. And indeed, the Scots have played a very considerable role in that. I'm not sure on reflection whether many of them would actually, in the end, want to be part of a separate nation, rather than playing their very active and vibrant role in the life of in the life of England.
Yeah.
But I'm not complacent about it.
No.
And therefore, I think there is a very clear message, and I would hope that the community in England would be on the phone to the community in Scotland and say, we're better together.
Yeah. John, finally, I know you have been approached, because there are a number of other questions. I'm sure you will come back and answer those some other time. I know you were approached by the Sikh community. There was a hunger strike by Gurbakh Singh in India, trying to free up the prisoners who serve their time. I'm sure you've heard about that. What was your views on that?
Well, indeed, I was approached about this just before Christmas, and I'm very pleased to see that there seems to have been some accommodation, some discussions, and that several of those prisoners have been freed, although I do note that they've only been freed on license.
On parole.
On parole, rather than actually being, being properly let out, and not all of them have come out. But I'm very pleased that he's felt able to come off his hunger strike. And we must wish him a speedy recovery with proper medical care and attention, because this can have a serious effect on people's health. But it is obviously an issue that we'll need to return to in the new year, in order that we can then establish more stability and also a proper dialogue between the community and Delhi. But certainly, it's a better outcome than we could have feared before Christmas, and one I think that will be welcome in the community. But there will still be very understandable concerns.
John, thank you very much for coming in and giving us your valuable time. I'm sure there's a number of other questions needs to be answered, and we run out of time. So again, on behalf of the Sikh Channel and the show, I thank you for coming. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So this was John Spellar talking to us about the issues which affect us daily basis. I'm sure these arguments will go on, and we will come back to him and other politicians and talk about these. For now, thank you very much for listening to us. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.